There is a kind of stillness that is not peaceful. It is predatory. A man sits at a desk. 4 hours have passed. His phone is in another room. The door is closed. His eyes are locked on a single document, a single problem, a single line of attack. Outside, the world is drowning in noise. Group chats, headlines, notifications, manufactured outrage, manufactured urgency. But he hears none of it, not because he is fighting distraction. He has simply stopped existing on the same frequency as the noise. This is what dangerous focus actually looks like. Not the productivity podcast version, not the morning routine version, the real version, the kind history's most powerful men cultivated as a private weapon and rarely spoke about in public, because they understood something most people never do. Attention is power, and most people are bleeding it away every day. More than 500 years ago, Machiavelli wrote something in chapter 14 of The Prince that almost nobody reads correctly. Most assume he was talking about warfare, armies, conquest, politics. They miss the deeper lesson. He was describing the structure of a focused mind, and if you understand what he meant, modern life begins to look very different. Most men believe they can focus. That is the deception. They sit down to work. A few minutes pass, then something pulls them away. A notification, an itch, a random thought, a sudden urge to check something that did not seem important a moment ago. They come back, then leave again, then return, then leave again. And because they spend hours in front of their work, they call it productivity. It is not productivity. It is fragmentation. Earl Miller, a neuroscientist at MIT, has spent decades studying the prefrontal cortex. His conclusion is simple. The human brain does not multitask. It cannot. Instead, it rapidly switches between targets, and every switch comes with a cost. A little less precision, a little less clarity, a little less momentum. One switch seems harmless. Hundreds are not. By the end of the day, your mind is not exhausted from effort. It is corroded, like steel left in salt water, and the damage goes deeper. In 2009, researcher Sophie Leroy identified something she called attention residue. When you move from one task to another, part of your attention stays behind. You think you have moved on. Your brain has not. A portion of your mental energy remains attached to the previous email, the previous conversation, the previous problem. For the next several minutes, you operate below your actual capacity. Now imagine this happening dozens of times every hour, every day, every year. A disturbing truth appears. You are not a focused man with occasional distractions. You are a distracted man with occasional moments of focus, and the modern world has been engineered around that weakness. Every app, every platform, every notification, built by people far more focused than you. Psychologists, behavioral scientists, dopamine researchers, all competing for the same thing, your attention. The result is the man staring back at you in the mirror. 20 open tabs, unfinished goals, projects abandoned for months. The same paragraph read 3 times because his mind keeps drifting somewhere else. 500 years before smartphones existed, Machiavelli understood the principle perfectly. In The Art of War, he wrote that the strength of a soldier is not measured by his weapon. It is measured by his ability to hold his position when chaos surrounds him. That is the ability modern men have lost, the ability to hold position. And every man who has ever possessed real power understood the same truth. Recovering that ability is not a productivity exercise. It is a war. Doctrine 1, the singular object. Every war begins with a choice. Not a weapon, not a strategy, a choice. The choice to make one thing matter more than everything else. In chapter 14 of The Prince, Machiavelli wrote that a prince should have no other object, no other thought, no other profession but war. Most people read that and immediately dismiss it. They assume he was talking about armies, sieges, conquest, politics. Wrong. Machiavelli was not describing warfare. He was describing focus, the structure of a mind organized around a single objective, because the principle behind those words is timeless. A man who divides his attention across many pursuits masters none of them. He becomes busy, competent, occupied, but never dangerous. The prince who tries to be a philosopher, merchant, courtier, artist, and scholar, at the same time eventually becomes none of them. He spends his life visiting ambitions instead of building them. That is the disease of modern life. People worship options. They worship balance. They worship variety. Yet history was rarely shaped by balanced men. It was shaped by obsessed men, men who organized their lives around one objective, one mission, one war. Look at Admiral Yi Sun-sin, October 1597, the Battle of Myeongyang. A Japanese fleet of more than 300 ships approached Korea's coast. Yi Sun-sin had 13 to 14. By every military calculation of the time, he should have been destroyed. He wasn't, because while others saw numbers, Yi Sun-sin saw the battlefield. For months, he studied the currents of the Myeongyang Strait, day after day, until he knew exactly when the tides would reverse, exactly where larger ships would lose control, exactly where chaos would emerge. At the same time, he drilled his men relentlessly, again and again and again, until every movement became instinct. Everything else was pushed aside. Political pressure, ignored. Betrayal from his own government, ignored. Personal grief, ignored. Not because those things did not matter, but because they could not be allowed inside the operational space of his attention. There was only one objective, the battle, nothing else. And when the tides finally shifted, preparation met opportunity. His 13 ships destroyed dozens of enemy vessels. The larger fleet collapsed into confusion. The invasion broke apart, not against superior numbers, against superior focus. That is the principle. Not balance, not productivity, not time management. Focus. Singular focus. Choose your war. Then let everything else suffer from neglect. Most men refuse to do this. And because they refuse, they lose everywhere. They want the career, the physique, the relationship, the social life, the side business, the investments, the hobbies, the recognition, all at once. Everything running simultaneously, everything maintained at a comfortable middle. Nothing pursued deeply enough to demand sacrifice. Nothing pursued long enough to create mastery. That is why nothing becomes powerful. Sun Tzu understood this principle as clearly as Machiavelli. He wrote that the general who tries to be strong everywhere becomes strong nowhere. The battlefield changes. The principle does not. Power requires concentration. Attention requires concentration. Strength requires concentration. You cannot climb every wall. You cannot fight every war. You cannot pursue every ambition. At some point, a choice must be made. Choose the wall, commit to the climb, and let the others fall. Doctrine 2. The Engineered Cage. Machiavelli understood something about war that most people misunderstand about focus. Wars are not won by men who fight harder. They are won by men who choose the battlefield. The same is true of attention. Most people believe focus is a matter of discipline. It is not. It is a matter of environment. You cannot create dangerous focus inside conditions designed to destroy it. It does not matter how motivated you are. It does not matter how disciplined you think you are. Your willpower is a candle. The modern world is a wind tunnel. Sooner or later, the flame goes out. This is the principle behind what Cal Newport calls deep work. For more than a decade, he has studied the ability to perform cognitively demanding work without distraction. His conclusion is uncomfortable. The people who produce the most valuable work are not always the smartest. They are the ones who build environments where concentration can survive. That is not a personality trait. It is a strategy. And strategy beats motivation every time. History provides the same lesson. Consider Isaac Newton. In 1665, the plague forced Cambridge University to close. Newton left. For 18 months, he lived in relative isolation. No crowds, no meetings, no endless correspondence, only solitude. Most people think his greatest discoveries happened despite that isolation. The truth is the opposite. They happened because of it. During that period, Newton laid the foundations of calculus, advanced optics, and the laws of motion that would later reshape science. His environment became a weapon. The isolation was not an obstacle, it was an advantage. And that lesson matters even more today, because modern distraction operates with industrial efficiency. Gloria Mark, a researcher at the University of California, Irvine, spent more than 20 years studying interruptions in the workplace. Her findings are disturbing. The average knowledge worker is interrupted every 3 minutes, and after each interruption, it takes approximately 23 minutes and 15 seconds to fully recover focus. Think about that. 23 minutes. If interruptions arrive every 3 minutes, recovery never happens. You are not regaining focus. You are permanently trying to regain focus. Most people spend their entire professional lives trapped in this cycle, half focused, half present, operating far below their actual capacity, not because they lack intelligence, because their attention never remains still long enough to become powerful. This is what deep work solves, not by making you smarter, by protecting the conditions that allow your intelligence to function. The solution is surprisingly simple. Phone in another room. Door closed, notifications removed, one screen, one document, one problem, nothing else. And stay there. 90 minutes minimum. Anything less is often performance. Your brain needs time to settle, time to stop reaching for stimulation, time to stop demanding novelty. At first, it will resist. It will invent reasons to quit. It will create urgent thoughts, sudden reminders, imaginary emergencies, a message that cannot wait, an email that feels important, a notification that seems necessary. Most of them are lies. The world trains you to believe everything is urgent. It isn't. You are not a switchboard operator. You are not required to react to every signal. Most urgency is manufactured. Most interruptions are optional. The problem is that your brain no longer remembers the difference. So sit with the discomfort. Let the restlessness rise. Then let it pass. Because on the other side of that discomfort lies something most people have not experienced in years. A mind capable of holding a single thought. A mind capable of depth. A mind capable of real work. And for the first time, you will realize something surprising. The greatest obstacle was never your intelligence. It was the cage you allowed your attention to live inside. Doctrine 3. The trance beneath performance. Most men have never been here. That is the uncomfortable truth. They have heard about it, read about it, watched documentaries about it, but they have never experienced it for themselves, because reaching this state requires a level of attention that modern life rarely permits. In the 1970s, psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi began studying people who consistently performed at extraordinary levels. Artists, athletes, surgeons, chess masters, individuals whose work seemed to transcend ordinary effort. And despite their different backgrounds, they described the same experience. Time disappeared. Self-consciousness disappeared. The person and the task became one. He called this state flow. Most people misunderstand flow. They imagine a writer finding a rhythm, a musician lost in a melody, a runner catching a second wind. But the actual research describes something much more powerful. Csikszentmihalyi found that flow appears only when three conditions exist: a clear goal, immediate feedback, a challenge slightly beyond your current ability. Without these conditions, flow does not happen. With them, something remarkable occurs. The brain becomes quieter. Researchers later called this process transient hypofrontality. Parts of the prefrontal cortex temporarily reduce activity. The inner critic fades, self-doubt fades, hesitation fades, and what remains is execution. Pure execution, action without friction, action without overthinking. This is the state a surgeon enters during a difficult operation, the state a chess master enters during competition, the state Admiral Yi Sun Sin entered when 13 ships faced an entire fleet. This is what Machiavelli meant when he wrote that the disciplined soldier stops deliberating at the moment of action. He becomes the action. You have probably touched this state before. A work session that vanished before you noticed the time. A conversation that flowed effortlessly. A task completed with complete absorption, but those moments happened by accident. You did not create them. The dangerously focused man does. Deliberately. He defines the objective before he begins. Not work on the project, but complete this section, solve this problem, produce this result. Within this window, the target is precise, and the challenge is demanding but achievable. Hard enough to require focus, not so hard that it creates anxiety. Then he builds immediate feedback into the process. Visible progress, measurable movement, a clear signal that he is advancing. And finally, he protects the conditions, because flow cannot survive constant interruption. The result is a state most people rarely experience, not because it is rare, because they never create the conditions required to enter it. And here is the disturbing part. Once you experience this state repeatedly, ordinary life begins to feel intolerable. The endless notifications, the fragmented attention, the performative busyness, the appearance of work without real progress. It all starts to feel hollow because you have experienced what your mind is actually capable of. And once you taste that level of focus, distraction loses its appeal. The scrolling feels empty. The noise feels exhausting. The fragmentation becomes impossible to ignore. This is the price of dangerous focus. Most people will never pay it. They will agree with these ideas, then return to distraction. A few will choose differently. They will protect their attention, engineer the conditions, and enter a state that most people spend their entire lives hearing about but never experiencing. The choice is yours. Doctrine 4. The discipline of becoming boring. There is a quality in dangerously focused men that almost nobody talks about. It is not impressive. It does not make for good conversation. It does not photograph well. They are boring. Frederick the Great understood this better than most. The King of Prussia kept a routine so predictable that his courtiers could set their clocks by it. He rose at 4, read correspondence, wrote orders, practiced the flute, reviewed military reports, ate the same simple meals, attended court when necessary, left as soon as possible. He had few close friends. He preferred dogs, books, and maps. Visitors expected the spectacle of a king. What they found was a thin man in a worn blue coat who spoke briefly and looked perpetually tired. He was not exhausted. He was deployed. Every hour of his life had been organized around a single objective, the survival and expansion of Prussia. European courts did not understand him. They called him cold, eccentric, joyless. Years later, those same people wondered how this strange, boring man had outmaneuvered the combined armies of Austria-Russia, France, and Saxony. This is the part the productivity industry rarely mentions. Dangerous focus is not exciting. It is repetitive, monotonous. From the outside, it often looks like nothing is happening. The focused man is doing the same thing today that he did yesterday, and will do again tomorrow. Not because he lacks imagination, because he understands how power compounds. Small actions, repeated consistently, for years. While everyone else is chasing novelty, he is deepening mastery. Anders Ericsson spent decades studying elite performers, violinists, surgeons, athletes, chess grandmasters. His conclusion was simple. The difference was not talent. The difference was deliberate practice. The willingness to perform the same difficult exercise with complete attention thousands of times. The difference is not what they do. It is the depth at which they do it. You watch a virtuoso violinist and see genius. What you do not see is the 10,000th repetition, the hours spent correcting tiny flaws no audience would ever notice. The crowd sees performance. The performer remembers practice. This is why focused men are often misunderstood. People look at them and see little movement, little excitement, little drama. The crowd thinks nothing is happening. The crowd is looking in the wrong place. The real work happens below the surface, in the deep water, far from applause, far from attention, far from entertainment. And that leads to an uncomfortable truth. If you want to be entertained all the time, you cannot be deeply focused. The two states compete against each other. Entertainment requires novelty. Focus requires depth. Entertainment jumps. Focus stays. Entertainment consumes. Focus creates. Every hour spent chasing stimulation weakens your ability to remain with one thing long enough to master it. A mind fed endless novelty eventually loses its tolerance for depth. You cannot have both. At some point, you must choose. The crowd makes that choice every day. They say they want meaningful work. They say they want respect, influence, mastery. Then they spend the next decade scrolling, consuming, distracting themselves, waiting for results they never earned. You stand at the same fork. One path offers entertainment. The other offers depth. One feels good today. The other changes your life. Choose carefully. Doctrine 5. The combat of refusal. There is one final principle, the principle that completes the structure. A focused life is built less on what you do and more on what you refuse. Jocko Willink learned this in combat. During some of the most brutal fighting in Ramadi, he noticed something important. The men who survived were not the men who could do everything. They were the men who already knew what they would never do. The decision had been made long before the moment arrived. There was no hesitation, no negotiation, only execution. Apply that principle to your own life. Most men have never pre-decided anything. That is why every distraction becomes a battle. Every invitation, every notification, every request, every temptation, each one forces a decision in real time. And real time is the worst time to decide, because temptation is strongest in the moment, and consequences are hardest to see. This is why discipline feels exhausting. Not because discipline itself is difficult, because most people spend their lives negotiating with themselves. Again, and again, and again. The dangerously focused man removes the negotiation. He has already decided. He does not check social media during work hours. He does not answer every message the moment it arrives. He does not attend events that consume energy and produce nothing in return. These are not choices he is making today. They are choices he made months ago, encoded into the operating system of his life. No willpower required, because willpower is finite. Structure is not. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. A soldier constantly forced to make new decisions in battle is already losing. The purpose of training is not to increase choices. It is to eliminate them. By the time action is required, the response should be automatic. Train yourself the same way. Look carefully at the things that repeatedly pull you off course. The conversations, the relationships, the habits, the distractions, the unfinished commitments, the open loops draining attention from the back of your mind. Then make decisions. Permanent decisions. Not this week. Not until Friday. Permanent. Some people will not understand. They will call you rigid, obsessive, antisocial. They will say you have changed, and they will be right, because the version of you they knew had no center, no fixed point, no hierarchy. The new version does, and that center is not negotiable. Every man who accomplished something meaningful eventually became unavailable to certain distractions, unavailable to certain conversations, unavailable to certain temptations, unavailable to people who demanded access to his attention without earning it. That is the real battle, not against the world, against the thousand small forces trying to pull you away from your purpose. Win that battle and focus becomes natural. Lose it and no amount of motivation will save you, because in the end, power is not built through intensity. It is built through refusal. The men who changed the course of history all made the same decision. At some point, they stopped being available for the small daily betrayals of their purpose. And now you stand at that same crossroads. This is what Machiavelli meant in chapter 14. Not war as conquest, not war as violence, war as mental structure. A mind organized around a single objective, a mind that refuses with calm and relentless discipline every attempt to pull it elsewhere. Most men will never build that mind. They will feel inspired for an hour. They will watch another video, read another article, save another quote, then tell themselves they will begin tomorrow. Tomorrow, the favorite refuge of distracted people. Meanwhile, their attention continues to leak away. A notification, a message, a distraction. 100 tiny interruptions, nothing dramatic, nothing memorable, just thousands of small cuts accumulating over years, until the man they could have become is buried beneath the man they settled for. Most will never notice. A few will. A few will close the screen after this. They will sit quietly. They will put the phone face down. They will choose one task, one objective, one target, and they will hold their position. 90 uninterrupted minutes. No switching, no scrolling, no negotiation. For the first time in years, they will encounter the version of themselves that modern life has spent decades fragmenting. That encounter changes a man, not overnight, not all at once, but permanently. Because once you experience undivided attention, the scattered version of life loses its appeal. The scrolling feels empty. The procrastination feels painful. The constant noise becomes difficult to tolerate. You have tasted something deeper. And once you taste depth, distraction no longer satisfies. The world notices this, not because anything obvious has changed, but because focused people carry a different presence. Others feel it, even when they cannot explain it. They speak differently around you. They listen more carefully. They take you more seriously, not because you demanded respect, because attention itself creates gravity. And that was the gift Machiavelli was actually offering, not power over other people. Not influence, not control, something far more valuable, power over the only territory that was ever truly yours, the territory between your own ears. The real question is not whether you can become dangerously focused, it is whether you can tolerate what that actually means. The silence, the distance, the fact that most people around you will never operate at that level because real focus separates you, not loudly, quietly, but permanently. Most men will never cross that line. They prefer shared distraction, shared noise, shared excuses. It feels easier to be scattered together than alone in depth. But a small number will stay after this ends. They will not rush to the next video. They will not fill the silence immediately. They will sit with it, and in that silence, something shifts. Attention stops breaking. The mind stops jumping. For the first time, there is stillness without fragmentation. That is where the change begins. Not in motivation, not in emotion, but in the ability to remain. Most will leave this moment and return to the same cycle. Scroll, consume, repeat. But the door does not close here. It stays open. And the choice stays with you. Because the question was never whether you could focus. The question is whether you are willing to be alone with it. That is the cost, and most will not pay it. One last thing. Everything beyond this point is on Patreon. The deeper breakdowns, the full scripts, the uncensored work. YouTube limits what can be said here, so the rest continues there. It is $4.99 a month, less than a coffee. Most will ignore it and move on. Do not. The door is open. See you on the other side.